defended against any consensus, any majority, anywhere, any place, any time. And anyone who disagrees with this can pick a number, get online, and kiss my ass.
No representation is made that the quality of legal services to be performed are greater than the legal services provided by other lawyers. I'm Harry Steele, backwoods Southern lawyer and candidate for mayor of the city of Bay Minette, my little hometown. I'm joined today by my partner and client, Mr. Rip. How are you doing down in Fairhope?
Very good, and I'm not a candidate for any office. I'm running a nonprofit consumer association, which drives everybody crazy.
And Rains, how
sir.
Things out in Texas?
Oh, just trying to avoid getting sick and dying. And that's pretty much about it. Doing a little work for a local candidate who's thinking about starting something up for the next year's election, but anxious to hear about how things are going over there.
How'd that storm treat you, Rains?
Just fine. We got a little rain. My yard grew a little more than normal. And
Yeah,
that's about it.
bad.
No, nothing to it.
Good.
A lot of wind.
No, not really.
Huh.
Too
I can
far
some
south.
things down on the coast a little bit. Just what the sensationalized stuff on the Weather Channel.
We're down in Galveston maybe, but no, not up here.
So SARS-CoV-2, 19,176,624 global cases with 716,400 deaths. The United States topping out at 4.9 million people with 160,437 deaths. So the interesting thing is Alabama's clocking about 1,000 cases a day, and that is the death rate for the United States. Does that sound right to you guys? About 1,000 people a day dying from COVID?
Yep.
It's right there at it.
800 to
1,000,
yeah.
Yeah, they're projecting 300,000 before the end of the year that may lose their lives.
It's all right, though. You can still go to Sturgis, South Dakota this weekend for the biggest bike rally in the country because, boy, they're just going to be flooded with those idiots up there. So,
Oh, man, that's going to be completely insane. 250,000 people in one place all drinking. And
If
in
you
the
like
middle of the
tattoos
COVID
and
zone.
plastic surgery, it's the place for you. So Alabama numbers, 94,827 confirmed with 1,674 deaths. And do you guys see how our numbers are tapering off here?
Right.
That's because we've shut down several of our testing sites around because we don't have adequate reagents or long enough Q-tips to touch people's brains with or whatever. So we don't know if this is a drop-off in testing or a drop-off in reporting or the labs being backed up or it's actual. You see these gaps.
What we really need is the testing that they're going to be doing in the UK, and it's like
rapid testing.
90 minutes. 90 minutes, you get the results. That's how you'll burn this thing out. You test everybody you can, you find it, you isolate it, and then shut it down. But until we get this testing thing straight, we're going to be like a yo-yo.
All right, boys, I want to wager on this. What's the over and under? I say the schools will open like they should as planned. And what would you take the over and under on 30 days for $1,000? I mean, do you think the school will be open 30 days after it opens? Or do you think it'll be 90 days?
I'd say there's a 50-50 chance that they'll have to shut down again.
I agree.
I'll take the over 30.
You'll take the over on 30? Okay. Why? Well, look, when 3 beloved teachers around Baldwin County die from COVID, the AEA is going to step in, and we're going to remember that they are the 800-pound gorilla in the room, right?
I don't think so.
We'll see.
I don't think so. I'm gonna take the over. I'm gonna say that red states, red governors are going to keep them open.
I can tell you in Fairhope that the teachers are very, very concerned about opening school. Very
So
concerned.
this is what a leader does when 20,000 people are headed for his little town that has no more ICU capacity. Okay, y'all listen.
Somber. Mayor Walt Maddox told reporters that August will be one of the most consequential months in Tuscaloosa history.
COVID-19 is more than just a healthcare issue. It's an economic issue. It's a workforce issue. It's impacting every phase of American life.
Which is exactly what you've said, Raines, right? Repeatedly.
Mhm.
Is he the first politician you've actually heard say, "Here's what's going on"?
Well, he's the first
one
politician
I've heard.
in Woods, yeah.
And to ignore that reality, to me, that would be the greatest hoax of all.
20,000 more citizens are coming to the city at the end of the month when the University of Alabama reopens. So Maddox is acting now, subject to working out some details with business owners. Effective tomorrow, Thursday at 5 p.m., bar occupancy must be cut to 50% by 9 every night. Entertainment venues must reduce occupancy all the time to 25% from the current 50%. And he's ending bar-only service at restaurants at 9. Drinks can still be ordered later from the table. Why? The latest numbers. More than 100 patients with COVID now at DC. Double-digit increases almost every day. Numbers the hospital calls
manageable but fragile. And that is today. That's not the end of August.
I just got to tell you, that's the kind of leadership we need around here.
Yeah, the Democratic Party totally left him on his own in the last election. They should have supported him much more than they did.
All right. So where do you guys want to go from here?
Oh, you got the.
We can go left or right.
All right.
How about we do some municipal election stuff? How about that? August 25th, municipal elections. Let's talk about the name of the podcast, Spanish Fork. So yesterday, I believe it was, the video that we've been waiting to see of I guess it's an alleged assault, but he's been charged with harassment. The mayor, McMillan in Spanish Fork, who is running again. He's the incumbent, and this video came out of him allegedly slapping the magistrate. And you can see here he has some competition. Rebecca Cornelius, Jeffrey Bately, David Westerfield, all running against him. So
wide open.
yeah, one of our local attorneys allegedly let this thing slip on the internet. So he gets a free trip to my hunting camp anytime he wants to go.
Well, the one thing you said was allegedly. Could we clarify that by looking at the film?
Yeah, let's have a look.
That's the mayor who just came into the frame.
Dang.
Here's the windup. Here's the stretch. Whop. Yep.
I don't think that's allegedly to you, Raines.
It looks pretty obvious to me what happened there.
Kind of like that Sherry case. Allegedly knocked her off the bar stool of my butt.
Yeah, that paints a pretty. I mean, it's not the clearest picture, but it's pretty damn clear.
Well, you can see.
I can tell the guy's shirt size. Yeah.
And
it just the whole thing freaks me out. I mean, how the hell could he still be in the building 24 hours after he did it? I don't get it.
Well, now remember, who put him in office and who wants him to stay there?
Absolutely.
Right? The only game in town's Baldwin County Sewer Service. Who's been their registered agent since, I don't know, since you had to register as a lobbyist? The city attorney. Who was the county attorney, is the registered lobbyist for Baldwin County Sewer Service, and he's the one that monkey wrenched this whole thing by saying, Judge, I believe I have a conflict. The mayor is my client, and I can't be a fact witness. We need the Court of Appeals and the bar to tell us that that's not so.
Right.
I don't know. I got a Facebook message from his wife said it's bullshit. He hits me a lot harder than that. So it's.
I don't think that's true, Raines.
No, it's not true.
All right. So all right. Well, let's talk about the Bay Minette Police Department just is the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah, you guys watch this with me for a second.
A grand theft auto turned into a high-speed chase today. The pursuit went from Bay Minette to Cantonment in Northwest Florida.
I think Dana Winters is one of the more dateable ladies on the news around here too, by the way.
WKRG.com mobile journalist Daniel Smithson tells us how this happened.
The crash happened here on Highway 29 in Cantonment, more than 30 miles away from where it was stolen. Matthew Hadley, the owner of the stolen vehicle, says he walked inside the Jet Pep gas station in Bay Minette this morning around 8:30 to buy a drink. They say they chased the stolen truck driven by an unidentified man from Bay Minette into Escambia County, Alabama, then into Escambia County, Florida. Police.
We recovered your truck, Mr. Hadley. It got some slight frame damage and a mangled corpse inside.
I mean, my God, look at that vehicle, would you?
The driver lost control of the truck on Highway 29 after intentionally.
You can't even tell what it is.
We're awaiting dental records so we can. Okay, so did you hear this? They chased him into the adjacent county, Escambia County, Alabama, and then into Escambia County, Florida. And this big wreck happened right here in the middle of town. If there is a downtown cantonment, okay.
That looks like downtown Cantonment. It reminds me of downtown DeFuniak Springs. It's just a little south.
Very close. Very close.
The man was pronounced dead on the scene. Hadley admits he left his keys in his trunk, something he felt comfortable doing in a small town like Bay Minette. Not anymore.
Can't even go into a gas station anymore and buy your drink just because got folks out here. It's too sorry to work for a living and would rather steal things.
He says.
And there you have it.
Well, I gotta say this. I don't think you can hang that completely on the Bay Minette Police Department, dude. I mean, that was a multi-jurisdictional. That wasn't a Dukes of Hazzard chase with one cop car. That had to have been like 8-10 different agencies involved in that. So
you'd think they would have broke it off though as fast as they got.
You don't know the Florida Highway Patrol very well.
Well, Rain, this chase started at the intersection of McConnell and 7th in like a residential neighborhood and went through people's yards and things on a peaceful Sunday afternoon. There's a high-speed chase through the spirited chase all the way through town, all the way through Atmore, all the way down 29. Maybe the guy was real dangerous or whatever, and they knew who he was.
I'm gonna tell you something. The only thing that I'm gonna speculate on that I feel good betting on in this situation is that guy Hadley, when he was walking into that gas station. I'll bet you 8-3, pick him, and I'll take lightning bets on it too. He wasn't wearing a mask.
It was a rather large jacked up truck. All right, so Paul, let's talk Fairhope municipal elections, please.
All right, as you know, in Fairhope, we will go through the candidates first. We got the BP Good Vibes paddleboard guy, and we have heard that the north breeze blew him out into the bay, and the Coast Guard had to come get him. And they asked him how he was, and he said he lost his paddle, but he had good vibes. So that's about all we know about him.
I love that.
All right, Paul, do we have some bona fide on this? I mean, do we have a source on
this? The report. Rescued on paddleboard.
I'd like to see the log at the Coast Guard station, because that is almost too good to be true.
All right, then we have Annette Sanders. Really don't know anything about Miss Sanders at all. Sherry Sullivan, and then Karen Wilson. Karen Wilson is the incumbent. And then in place 1, we have Jack Burrell running against Deb Hopkins. Please, people, pay attention. Deb Hopkins, we need to get Jack Burrell out. Place 2, Corey Martin's already secured that site, as well as Jimmy Conyers in place 3. In place 4, we have Robert Brown running against Howell Gibbons. We surely need to show Mr. Brown the door, if at all possible. And place 5 is Kevin Boone running against a young man, Joshua Gammon. And hopefully Mr. Boone will be holding hands with Mr. Brown and Mr. Burrell when they go out the door. That's who's running in the Fairhope elections. Now, we've had a couple of people on from other locations, Daphne and Spanish Fort. And this next week, we're going to have several different interviews. We'll step it up this next 2 weeks with quite a few other interviews. But you want to get into the sign thing now, or you want to wait?
Yeah, let's talk about signs.
All right. One of the ripreport.com and the Facebook sites along Backstory, we put out a publication Wednesdays and Fridays, as well as the podcast. And the one this week on Freaky Friday is signs. Now, those of you that aren't familiar with the politics here, like some of us are, Catalyst has been around for quite some time. They have been under 2 or 3 different names, but they always have the same MO. And the one thing that they like to do is signs. Signs are the big thing for them. They try to use the optics of the signs to really get the attention of people. Now, Catalyst is spread out between Fairhope, Daphne, Spanish Fork, all the way to Bay Minette. Some people believe this is only an issue in Fairhope. It's not at all. But and the signs that Catalyst uses for their candidates are all the same. It's a PVC shaped sign. Now, look at this one right here. Hold it there a minute, Harry. These are the candidates for Fairhope: Boone, Brown, Burrell, and Sherry. All of them are Catalyst. That's your Catalyst list right there. They're all placed together. They run as a group, and they stay as a group. So if you're voting for one, you're voting for all of them. Now in Daphne, you can see the same type of thing with the signs. You go the Daphne one.
Oh, sorry. There you go.
My technician is asleep. All right, the Daphne one. This is really bold. I mean, this is what I hope people look at and pay attention to. Here are 3 signs: 2 councilmen and a mayor, and the mayor's appointed person to run, because Mayor Haygood set this up for Kerry to run. His signs he announced, and his signs went up. All of them go up the day after qualification. And what they try to do is they try to put up so many signs you think, oh, well, this guy's pretty well connected or whatnot, and you really don't understand the focus behind it is that this is one group, Catalyst, Scott Boone, CSB. Now look at this one here in Fairhope. This is Sherry running
all together, don't it?
Yeah, look at this. This is Sherry. Boom. You look all the way down, you'll see Jack. Brown's got a sign down there, but look who Sherry's sign is sitting next to. Snedeker. Snedeker is our municipal judge. Now you talk about a cozy relationship. This is how these signs, just like tea leaves, these signs can talk to you if you know how to look at them.
Yep.
This is the good old boys all lined up together. Look in Daphne, Fairhope. You can go to Spanish Fort, the same thing. Catalyst needs to be taken down a notch. People need to pay attention to what's going on in each one of their communities. Right. For a Catalyst is very much like the Club for Growth PAC that supported Low Tower against Carl. Okay, now that Club for Growth PAC, they'll put you in office, but when they put you in office, you owe them. And that's the same thing with Catalyst or Scott Boone Consultant. You go in there, you're going to vote their way, and you're in a clique. That's not what we need, folks. We need independent people. We need to, in Fairhope, we need to throw all of the council, the last three remaining, the 3 Bs out, and keep our mayor. And then the council can elect to vote for a new municipal judge and a new city attorney, which Fairhope desperately needs.
Agree.
Now, and your city attorney down in Fairhope is the municipal judge here in Bay Minette.
Right. And the city attorney is the one responsible for dropping, losing, or not filing all the charges against Mr. McSherry in the McSherry case in Fairhope, which I think we're going to hear more about real soon.
Like, how do you mean?
Like, I mean, I think that we're going to hear more news about the McSherry case very soon. And anybody running for office, particularly the Catalyst people, remember McSherry is, guess whose best friend? Jack Burrell.
Jack Burrell.
He named a sandwich after him after he whipped his butt, right?
Well, also people should remember that it was the Catalyst candidates, Sherry Brown and Burrell, that also wanted to go through with the arts and crafts show and quote unquote take a chance. And they were voted down and pushed down by the mayor, who just said absolutely not. And finally they canceled it.
All right. So I want to switch gears for a second and talk about something else local that I don't think that anybody else is really talking about. Did you know that the Clarke County landfill is on fire?
Oh, yes, I saw that. It looked like thousands of tires.
Let's see what it looks like.
Burning through the night at Clarke County Landfill. This is exclusive drone video of the fire at the Jackson landfill. You'll see it only here on WKRG News 5. Crews from Clarke and Washington counties have been working to put out the flames after tires caught on fire at the landfill.
You heard any kind of air quality alert, anything like that, Paul?
No, and I bet you anything somebody said at a fire, knowing that once that baby got going, you can't stop it. You'll have to let it burn out.
Everybody with the tire pile has a fire, eventually to get rid of them.
Jackson's police chief says it could take hours or days to extinguish these flames. We won't know how the fire started until the flames have been put out.
I don't know how much our listeners want to hear it, but I've got it rhymes with tire fire story. I've got a wire fire story. And if you think our listeners want to hear it, I'll tell it. But it's a good one Friday afternoon. All right. When I was about 15, my other best friend, I had two best friends, and the other one, his father's a industrial electrician, commercial electrician. And they had a big house, a big plot of land up in Hurley, Mississippi, which is out in the middle of just nowhere. I mean, it makes Bay Minette look like New York City. And they're way out there. They set on about 5 acres, and about 50 meters back from the house, they got a line of azaleas that covers a kind of a storage section of the back of their property. They got an old tool shed out there, and his daddy had his grandpa's old Pascagoula River houseboat, old wood houseboat, rotting on drums out there, And his father had finished a job lining up or wiring up all of the Deschamps in South Mississippi, the new Delshant's grocery stores. And he had a trailer back there with a bunch of boxes of scrap wire in it. And he told his son and I that afternoon up there in Hurley, he said,
Hey, Brains, I hate to interrupt you, but I have a deer in my backyard, and I set up the deer cam just for Paul.
Well, yeah, I see it.
See it?
Yeah, pretty.
Anyway, keep going.
So he said, a couple of industrious young men get out there on that wire, a couple of pair of strippers, and take that copper down to the recycle man in Pascagoula, make themselves a pretty tidy sum. I think back then copper still was pretty high. It was $2-something a pound. And there had to have been probably 1,000, 1,500 pounds of wire in all these boxes back there. So we get out there, and he says, unload it off the trailer and leave it there by the houseboat because I need to use the trailer. And we took it all off. It took half the day. And while we're doing that, we thought, we may need to be smarter than this. Instead of stripping this wire down, why don't we just put it in a big pile and light it on fire and let the fire burn the insulation off? The copper is going to be just fine.
Talk about toxic.
Until it reaches a certain temperature.
Well, yeah. So what we did is we piled up. Imagine like 200 cable spools of like 500 foot of connector cable. That's basically what we had.
So
but it was all
basically like the guys in Beirut who decided to leave all that ammonium nitrate in that warehouse for 30 years, right?
No, we were a lot smarter than them. We lit it on fire with kerosene. And we cleared out. We used the lawn rake to clear the leaves away from it and all. And to make this long story short, I'll tell you right now that whenever the U.S. Forestry Service has to get involved in fighting a fire on private property, they charge you for it. And me and my best friend had to work. Not only did I have to work on my grandfather's shrimp boat that following summer, I had to work for his daddy for free for just about 3 months because they had 6 different fire departments. Every fire department in Jackson County came up there to fight it. It was everything they could do to save the house. It melted all the siding on the back of the house from 75 meters away. Burnt down probably 7 acres of forest. And yeah, the U.S. Forestry Service had their guys out there fighting that fire. It burned a crater in the backyard with a layer of glass in the bottom of it. It got so hot. And yeah, we never lived that down. The Great Wire Fire of 1988. It was.
So I'm going to have my cousin on here one day because he's going to have to tell it himself. But the story starts with, I wonder if this flare gun still works.
That's what I'm talking
and
about.
Similar hilarities and stuff. So,
Yeah.
Paul, do you know who Joe Rozowski is?
No.
Okay, so he's the guy that started the original Oyster House restaurants. His house burned to the ground today on Fish River. Nobody knows why, but anyway.
Really?
There were people there. Everybody got out and everything, but no, it's a total
Let
loss.
me tell you kind of a sad story, but happened in Vietnam. Of course, we used to burn our human waste with diesel, and these toilets, you pull out a can from underneath it from the back of the outhouse, and they'd burn it with diesel and everything. So this kid from New York didn't know his head from his shoulders, went out there and poured 5 gallons of gas in one, standing right there next to it, and threw a match in it. And he ran about 300 feet before they got him down on the ground, put him on a hospital ship, which was sitting right offshore, right in front of us. And he lived for about 5 days. But
Damn.
Man, I tell you what, that was one more horrible scene. I'll never forget that.
Great story. Great story, Paul. You got time to tell it again? God damn.
So let's switch gears and talk about the Bay Minette Landing Project.
Yeah, that'd be a little lighter.
Oh yeah.
Down on the river. So anyway, I did want to talk a little bit about my platform because I do think that the river is our most underutilized resource in Bay Minette. Did you know that the river was so close to Bay Minette, Paul?
Well, I wanted to ask you how wide and deep it was at that point you were talking about.
So have you ever seen the Ghost Fleet pictures? That's how deep it is. LSTs were stored up here in front of it. Yeah.
Wow.
So then transparency. I think Fairhope's done a good job with their transparency. The school board has an online checkbook. You can go look at every check they write every month. I would want Bay Minette to do that as well as live stream all of the meetings. And then, of course, law enforcement reform or public safety reform. I want to create a public safety committee with some citizens on there, and obviously want to talk about some less lethal and de-escalation training. Certainly not a defund the police, juice the police, juice their training, juice their capacities, especially if they're going to have to deal with crazy people. And then, of course, there's always that element. There are a lot of people, Paul, who wouldn't want some guy who owns a camp within 4 miles of the big ash pond to be mayor here. You know what I mean?
Right.
They're just all kinds of forces at play that want the status quo. So besides that, fried chicken and barbecue, because if your economy is so bad that you can't support fried chicken or barbecue, you got trouble. And we got a 3,000 acre mega site that we need to be marketing. And I just happen to know where $800,000 worth of houses are that we can get rid of. That'll go a long way towards marketing the mega site.
Well, Bay Minette, the citizens of Bay Minette should be really asking their county commission to rethink the 640 bed jail. Now, they may need to improve the jail and everything. That I still say that could be moved to the mega site. Could move the sheriff's office down to the mega site. You could move his fleet of cars down there, and then you could have a state prison built there, and the sheriff would have his compound with a prison, and he could lock up as many people as he wanted. But the fact of it is, they're talking about spending upwards of $30 million for this prison right in the middle of Bay Minette. How is that going to benefit the consumers of Bay Minette? I like the landing idea on the river a lot better.
And why would the city of Bay Minette abandon their police station so that the county could, the sheriff's department administrative offices could temporarily be there, and then the city's going to have to go spend $4 or $5 million on a new police station and justice center? That's
what I'm saying. This whole thing, nobody's thinking it through. Well, on top of that, you're going to have all that money going into Bay Minette. There's going to be a lot of people there with sticky pockets.
And just to prove my point, if you live in Bay Minette, when one of these incumbent council members come around and ask you for their vote, ask them what they know. Where's the new police station going to be built? Who's the consulting architect and engineer? Just what have they been told and what are they privy to? Because I'll guarantee you it's not what you would expect a council member to know, because everything's compartmentalized. There's no transparency.
Yeah. Well, I can assure you that if
this looks like something, and so my opponent, I looked at the picture and I was like, man, this looks like it was airbrushed, like this is something like a memorial service flyer or something. Anyway, I'd been upset with my printer. So let's go on with the rip report, Paul.
Well, one of the things too in Bay Minette that's going to happen is if the Catalyst group in Fairhope loses, this is their last chance. If they lose this, they're going to lose their footing in Fairhope, and you're going to find Catalyst right slap dab in the middle of Bay Minette, people.
And all Catalyst wants to do is to keep Bay Minette just like it is, so they can annex all the way up to 25, and Baldwin County Sewer Service can continue to grow and proliferate.
And everybody will just stay in their place, not attend the meetings, and the council will grin and nod.
That's right. That's right. You can't expect nothing if you don't do nothing. You got to get out there.
Well, back some of the news in Lagniappe. I only covered a couple articles. Of course, the number one thing Lagniappe this week is the Nappy Awards. That's for Mobile and Mobile and the Eastern Shore. And the winner of the hardest working elected official on the Eastern Shore is Mayor Wilson of Fairhope, and that is for the 4th year in a row. So I hope people are paying attention that, you know, they they want to criticize the mayor of Fairhope and throw her out and put Catalyst in. The council has won nothing, 0, no awards. She has 4 Nappy awards to her credit. So congratulations to the mayor.
Rain and I have been accused of being nappy, but have never won an award.
Never won.
The other article I thought was one of the articles there I thought was very interesting was Outside Line about Baldwin County awards inmate phone contract to a different company. Here we are again talking about prisons, and you know, what are all the little things that go with it? It's a cottage industry. You've got the ankle monitors. That's a cottage industry. You got the P test. Okay, you got
it really is something else.
Yeah, you got the
lesson. You can't call that a cottage industry, though. I mean that's LabCorp and everybody like that. That's a national.
Well, trust me, I know how it was put together, and it was homegrown, brother. Believe me, Paul Rip has the articles of incorporation for the outfit. It was homegrown by a bunch of our judges and some other folks, right, Paul?
Yeah. But this talks about the. Well, I know several people on the ankle monitors that have told me the excessive fees that they're paying, and I mean, you know, you got to look at it. These people are in jail, or you don't know what's going to happen. They're not working, but they're on an ankle monitor, and they got to pay for the ankle monitor to go to court. I mean, you know, where does it stop? Anyway, the Baldwin County Commission approved a lucrative contract for the inmate phone services recently with Global Tel Link. Now, in 1999, Dan Wiley, the former Mobile County Commissioner, and 4 business partners, including former state auditor Terry Ellis, all pleaded guilty to federal charges, including money laundering, mail fraud, tax evasion, and an investment group that purchased the company discovered accounting irregularities. Prosecutors later revealed the company has been obscuring payments to its principals, padding inmate expenses, and underpaying commissions to local governments. But under the new management, Global Tel Link went on to thrive in the industry and controls more than half of the market share today. Now, in Baldwin County, I wanted to know a lot more about it, and the public service, let's see, under the terms of the new contract, Global Tel Link will have to generate roughly $38,000 in additional proceeds in order to meet the contractual minimum guarantee. With new restrictions on visitation due to the pandemic, Sheriff Mack said this week, video and phone provide inmates with more opportunities for the contract. In addition, those visits by video provide the visitor the convenience of not driving to Bay Minette and going through the security. While he could not provide an explanation for the deviation for the Alabama Public Service Commission's rate caps, Mack said, some sheriff's offices bid direct, and the contract is a tri-party agreement between us, the commission, and the vendor. We work through the commission.
Let me again remind you of how blessed you are to have me on your podcast. So I used to be a county manager, right?
Right.
I've dealt with 2 previous little old sheriffs, Tracy Halsey up in Conecuh County. And of course he built a jail while I was there. And then James Hayes up in Etowah County, the kingpin. He was the kingpin sheriff back in those days, just like Hawk is now. You know, he was the president of the Sheriff's Association nationally. Everybody thought he was going to be tapped to be our first EMA director statewide. And they all have some kind of scam going on with the damn phone system in the jail where they end up getting 1/3 of the money goes into their pistol permit, you know, discretionary money. Nothing to do anything for these guys, for the employees or for the inmates themselves. This is all going in, you know, so he and his command staff can go eat fried chicken every Friday. Trust me, that's what's going on with the money.
Well,
we know that's not going on in Bay Minette because there ain't no chicken places in that downtown.
You go to Streets,
Right.
It's a sit-down joint. It ain't a chicken joint.
You're not going to have any chicken. You're not going to have any barbecue. But by God, you're going to have a 640 bed jail.
And, you know, we've had a Ruby Tuesdays. You know, it's tough when Ruby Tuesdays closes its doors. And I thought, you know, you said you thought they were all closed anyway, but
I thought they were out of business.
we still have 3 in Baldwin County, don't we, Paul?
The one here in Fairhope closed. One here in Fairhope closed too, I think.
It's tough.
Well, just like everything else, Alabama, South Alabama's 25 years behind everybody else on its best days. So the Ruby Tuesdays down there are just now shutting down. The rest of them closed down about 15 years ago in the United States.
I think you're wrong, Raines. I think they're much further back in 25 years.
I think when it comes to restaurants, maybe civil rights call it 50.
So y'all know I'm here, right?
Well, when you have a group like Catalyst that's willing to name themselves and they represent the good old boys, you know we're in the backwoods.
Oh, it's the marriage of the good old boy. It's the co-option of the good old boy system by the developers' money.
Correct.
Truly.
And this bull crap storefront that there's some organization that I could have gone to hire to run my campaign against Bob Wills. You think that's likely?
No.
You think they throw aside their 2-term incumbent?
Well, what are your
pay them? Of course not.
Well, what are your signs? What does Mr. Wills' signs look like up there in Bay Minette?
Well, of course they're all on, you know,
PVC.
Many of them are on the right of way, but yes, many PVC pipe signs, and of course we know he's Catalyst.
Explain that PVC pipe thing you're talking about.
What they do is all their signs are a PVC frame. It's just and then the sign is hung in between it.
Right,
these are the two right here. See,
I got you.
Yeah, and what they've done that identifies them so much is that all the candidates that they run throughout the whole county, well, they must have some bloody sign company
some dude sitting in there making these things for months.
For months and months. And what they do is they try to play this psychological game that the day after the qualification ends, they go out and flood everywhere with these signs. So what we're hoping is that people will use their eyes to see, but use their head to vote.
I mean, you couldn't pick a more perfect time for the municipal election and for that video of the Catalyst mayor in Spanish Fort to be pantsed, so to speak.
And think of all the money and the time that we're wasted so far through the courts, through everybody on the McSherry case and on this case in Spanish Fort, when they're both on video.
Hey, Paul, let me ask you a question. When you went to the meeting May 28th and you gave them what for about the McSherry case, to your knowledge, has the city prosecutor refiled as he claimed he could under the rules?
No, nothing is. To my knowledge, the city attorney, Marcus McDowell, failed numerous times to file those charges. And as I understand it, the assault charge against Mr. McSherry, which was the most egregious charge, has just gone away due to his incompetence.
Well, I don't know about all that, but all I can tell you is the statement that he made to you, where he claimed that the rules allowed him to refile. It's my understanding of municipal law that the city only has jurisdiction to file a claim within 365 days of the date of the occurrence. So from the time he knocked her off the bar stool till a year later, they could have amended the charge. They could have charged him with any number of things. But after that time period ran, I'm not aware of any rules of appellate procedure that tolls the city's jurisdiction. I don't know anything that expands that 365 days.
And it's
Don't think of jurisdiction just as territorial. Think of it as temporal. Think of it as
right. And it's just a coincidence that Jack Burrell is very close friends with Mr. McSherry, who has Mr. McSherry's. In fact, there used to be a Jack Burrell sandwich on the menu at McSherry's, but everybody kept getting done.
Now, I'm just a small-town pizza lawyer, but I do declare that wrapping these 8 crispy corners of pizza in over 3.5 feet of bacon is perfectly legal.
Nice. Wait, slide that in there.
You want to end on that one?
Not really. God help us. We got to church this thing up, boys.
I'm in a mood today, baby.
Oh, man. So some of these other elections down in Foley, I hear good things about the fellow I made fun of, Mr. Helmich. He's the president of the council right now in Foley. And has been on the council for several years and commands respect and so forth and so on, is what I hear. So does anybody know? And we, of course, we're pulling for Richard Dayton. Do we know anything about this Ralph Eastburn guy that's running against him, or are we just going to trash him on principle?
I don't, but I would certainly go for Mr. Dayton there because of his persistence, like ours, on trying to get something done with the Baldwin County sewer.
Well, when I went up and met with the attorneys at the Public Service Commission, he was in the other room meeting with Twinkle and crew. Right. So he spent his own gas going up there working on this stuff for you folks. So you should vote for him. And this other fella, he may be fantastic. I don't know. If he's your neighbor, you ought to vote for him. So do you know anything about John Bays? Did we ever get to the bottom of him? He's running against the incumbent Robert Kraft, which, you know, everybody I know down there is fed up with him. Silver spoons. Well, now
you're on Orange Beach right now.
Well, I've got both of them, Gulf Shores and Orange Beach.
Oh, sorry. On Gulf Shores, let's see, where is she?
So over here, Joe.
That place too, Nan Hedgepath.
Yeah.
Now she is one of the ones that came out over the apartments and has spurred quite a bit of interest in election this time because they just shoved the apartments down the throat of all the residents in the area. I believe there's another individual that was in that group, but I can't say which one that is right now. But Nan would be certainly my pick on place 2.
So place 3 running unopposed is Phil Harris, and his daddy hired me to work there in '97. So good for him running unopposed. Joe Garris is an old name down there. I guess that's Garris Boat Works. That'd be old man Joe's son, Joe Jr. Steve Jones has been down there a while. It might be a good idea to recycle him. Cheryl Connell is running against him. And I'll leave place 2 up to you. I don't know anybody in place.
If they're an incumbent, if they're an incumbent and they've served 2 terms, vote against them. Put somebody new in.
And that's a better look than Orange Beach right there. They need some flushing in Orange Beach, my humble opinion.
I don't know too many people in Orange Beach other than Mr. Cannon and Jeffrey Boyd there at number 2 place. He's the one that helped our good tax man Elliott get elected. We see how well that went.
Have you ever seen the little thing of the dumpster floating down the river whilst on fire? That's what runs through my mind when I think of the tax man. So just a few more things. I want everybody to remember that we didn't go to the county commission meeting and raise Cain about Baldwin County Sewer Service just to get on television. We're going to stay on that, and we're going until we get a meeting. Then, of course, we have the cases that we've been following for you, and along with the lagniappe, especially the Jonathan Victor case. The Supreme Court heard arguments 2 weeks ago, and we're anxiously waiting to see if the sheriff is going to be able to claim that a body camera is actually the 21st century version of pen and paper, that it's highly detailed note-taking. It's not a public record. Or if it is, if it's ever part of an investigation, it never has to be released. I mean, does this sound like some Iron Curtain kind of crap to y'all? It does to me.
It really does.
It sounds like lower LA.
Except when it's on video, like the pub owner or the mayor of Daphne. I'm sorry, the mayor of Spanish Fort. And then, of course, there's the Brandon Hastings case that we brought to you a couple weeks ago. There's been a little bit more activity in that case, so I'm sure the powers that be are sweating and shredding.
Well,
yeah,
I can tell you on that case that Dr. Warner, Chris Warner, who's written like 26 books, he is working and trying to get this thing in front of the what is it, Harry? Justice Center of. No, the
acronym. I could come up with a name for a group.
Yeah, it's the group that works to get people out of prison on it. The Innocence Program. And they're going through the depositions right now, and he's going to try to put it in a narrative that can be given to some good defense attorneys and see what we can do on that case. That's going to be something that our listeners are going to be hearing about in the future. And it's probably going to be quite a bit of press about this particular case.
Yeah.
Well, the only other thing that I wanted to touch on just a little bit, because you are holding some kind of a monstrous looking rifle while we're talking here, is that the NRA and Raines, I intentionally have not read any articles on this other than a headline, but sight unseen, I know that this is a district attorney in a blue state, in a very blue county, who has come up with some good reason to say this good old boy fraud, wire fraud, and all this other stuff that the NRA board's doing should lead to its destruction. Am I fairly accurate about that?
Well, what happened is they organized as a nonprofit, I think, follow me on this range if I'm right, in the late 1800s, and that's in New York.
1880s, yeah.
1880, and that's in New York. So they come under New York jurisdiction. So New York.
Yeah. The whole nonprofit thing didn't come around till the 1950s. The 501c3 thing.
Right. So anyway, they're saying that, it was just a complete piggy bank for 3 or 4 of the executives, Lapeer especially. So we'll have to see where it goes, but it sounds like they got a pretty solid case because they got pictures of him on all these trips to the Bahamas and all these exotic hunting trips in Africa and stuff, and that's on everybody else's dues. That picture that you're looking at there, Harry, I had like over 5,000 slides. I had never seen that picture. During the COVID, I went through them all. I had never seen that picture before, but that's when I was in Dong Ha. That's an M14 rifle. That's the old Starlight scope, which was horrible.
It looks horrible.
You had to really get used to it, but I can tell you what, man, that M14 is like a good 22. You could shoot the eyes out of a fly with it. So it was a good weapon.
So
the NRA.
One of the recent past presidents is a friend of mine. I'm talking about of the National Rifle Association, is an attorney in Birmingham. And I'm saying if I'll be sure to give him a call and find out what the past president's position is, and we'll come back to this in the episode.
I can tell you all that. I'll give you the nutshell rundown of it right now. I follow the NRA because you're supposed to know your enemy. I despise the NRA. I hate everything about the NRA. The NRA tore itself apart this past summer. Not this summer we're in right now, but summer of 2019. They went to a national convention, and retired USMC Colonel Oliver North tried to orchestrate a coup of Wayne LaPierre and the entire board. And it went down in flames because there are people in the NRA who are furious with the NRA board and the way money has been spent and everything else. Now, the indictment and the suit by Letitia James, I believe is her name, and the New York Attorney General, that is going to revoke. That's going to get their 501c3 status revoked, and that'll be the end of them as a nonprofit. They'll have to start paying taxes on their donation. But Harry, what's the most important part of any lawsuit when you're trying to find out something that maybe the other side's got, but you need to go and look in a roundabout way? What's that called?
Discovery.
Like discovery or something like that?
Discovery.
So I believe this is a discovery exploit, and they are going to seek to they're going to seek to discover data that they believe exists that the National Rifle Association has for the past many years been laundering foreign funds that have gone into the GOP. And that's just illegal as hell. And I think that's really what the New York Attorney General is after. But because the NRA has been trying to destroy itself for the last year.
Right. That's the allegation. And just because there's been an allegation of something doesn't mean that it's true.
That's absolutely correct. But I believe that's what the Attorney General is after, are the financial documents, and she'll get those in discovery in a 501c3 lawsuit. Now, I think it's very poorly timed. I think it's an absolutely mind-shattering waste of political capital on the New York Democratic machine's part, and I think it's going to be a dog whistle for the far right. So I think it's poorly timed. I think it's poorly done. I think she could have done this next year, and I think it's a loss, because if anybody follows the NRA, I mean, I'm not even a fan. I hate the NRA, and even I know that they've been tearing themselves apart steady for the last 16 months. So they don't need the New York Attorney General to tear them to pieces, but it is what it is, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I knew that was going to be a good subject. All right, so we got T-shirts will be coming in the mail to you, Rains. You know how you like a T-shirt. You like to wash your car with all my stuff. So,
hot damn.
Oh yeah, I gotta have one of those.
Yeah, I gotta have one of those, dude. Send me a 2X.
I'm sure. All right, so
I got this is your campaign shirt right here. I don't know if you can read it still, but it says, "Don't hassle me, I'm local."
There you go.
So there's your campaign shirt in a nutshell right there.
Well, you don't get any more local than me. That's for sure. So, Paul,
I got the campaign hat for you too.
I noticed that. Please don't put it on right now.
I love it.
All right, guys.
All right,
I think we're to the end of the rope today.
All right.
I want to do some more candidate interviews next week. So anybody who's interested, please get in touch with us via Facebook, private message. And I was very interested to see that after being asked to leave the Baldwin County Citizens for Accountability page, one of our former county commissioners went and created his own page. And of course, we've invited him on here several times. I mean, at least he's like, I don't agree with hardly anything he's saying, but at least he's talking about things, right?
It's Baldwin County Unlimited.
Baldwin County Unlimited. So everybody go check out that website too, or Facebook page. It's pretty good. I joined it, and we'll try to keep some content up there. All right, Paul.
Okay, everybody be safe this weekend. Watch your social media sites for all of the campaign information, because due to COVID, 80% of it's going to be social media or more.
I'll sign off with this, gang. If you want to do something interesting, a little homework assignment you could do over the weekend is go to a thing called nukemap.com, NUKEMAP.com. That is a pretty cool site. Put in your zip code of Bay Minette, Alabama. Put in kiloton yield 2.75 and hit detonate, and you'll see exactly what the Beirut blast would have done.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
It'd blow out all the glass from the Walmart all the way to the cemetery across town. So just to give you some idea of what happened in Beirut, nukemap.com. It's a fun tool and a good way to waste some time, you know, thinking about end of the world kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's something we need to talk about. So I went from looking like one of the Bee Gees to every lesbian friend on a 80s talk show hairdo. I don't know how this happened, but it's either an Al Capone looking 1920 gangster fade, or it's the, I don't know.
You look like you should be pulling up a.
It's really bad.
Looks like you should be pulling up a Suzuki Samurai to the Birkenstock outlet and laying it down.
Yeah, I think it's called a fade, and it was very popular about 100 years ago.
I wear a fade. I just hadn't been to the barber
Bring
shop.
it back.
Same thing.
All right, guys.
Only difference is I make it look good.
That you do, my friend. Y'all have a good weekend.
All righty.
Essentially what I'll do is talk as best I can around some pictures here. The topic, the coming of the Creek War, was a real tough one to come up with imagery, because most of the interesting images that I had available to me really are either way earlier, but way back in the colonial period, or and moving forward. So this period of 1800 to 1813 or so is pretty illustration poor. So what I've resorted to is a series of maps, and hopefully we can kind of work our way through the various kinds of social issues, population changes that were going on during that run up to the Creek War. So start out with this map. Oh, I guess I should also preface that what I'll really be focusing on today to a large extent is the origins of the Federal Road, which ties in quite closely with the origins of the Creek War and early settlement in Alabama. And mainly the reason I kind of settled on that was that we have a grant from the Department of Transportation to do an archaeological survey of the Federal Road in Alabama from Fort Mitchell in Russell County, kind of ran south of here and then headed down to the southwest and ended up at Fort Stoddard, which is in modern-day Mount Vernon, just north of Mobile. And the creation of the road, the kind of the various political machinations that led to the ability for the federal government to build a road through the Creek Nation was, of course, a major source of irritation to the Creeks, but also some source of opportunity for some of the Creeks who were more inclined to become assimilated into American society. So the Federal Road really is a nice way to kind of look at all the issues involved leading to the Creek War. This map is the first federal postal route map produced in the United States, dates to 1796. And of course you can't see the detail over there but on this, but on the lower right there is a little mileage chart. Basically it kind of gives you distances between various sorts of postal post offices throughout the east, and they are entirely all on the eastern seaboard. They didn't extend very far inland at all back in 1796 when the Postal Service was just getting underway. And our area of interest, of course, is this region, which at that time was considered part of Georgia. It's heavily populated, but by Indians. Very few American citizens living in this region. Florida was still entirely in Spanish hands, and Florida extended all the way to the Mississippi River, where it abutted Spanish Louisiana. So this is before the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, a lot of Spanish activity on the Gulf and to the west on the Mississippi River. And of course the British up in Canada. So it's a very different map than we see just a very few years later at the end of the War of 1812. A lot of these details had changed, and the American influence was much greater by that time. Here's the close-up of the region of interest primarily to us, which would include Alabama in the middle there. And it's an area with, as I said, many different Indian groups living here. There are Seminoles already, primarily in the Panhandle in northern Florida. These are an offshoot of the Creeks themselves, some Creeks who'd moved down there pretty much from the American Revolution, or just before the American Revolution onwards, kind of a drifting migration down into this region. The Creeks primarily focused on in the upper creeks, rather, in the Coosa, Tallapoosa valleys and upper Alabama River area, and the lower creeks, which are not even shown on here at all, basically over in the Chattahoochee. And Choctaws throughout what's today central Mississippi, Chickasaws in northeastern Mississippi, and Cherokees up in this region, and other groups kind of wandering through. There are many other peoples involved here besides the big seed names. The Creeks, Choctaws, Cherokees, Creeks are the most famous, but many other small groups kind of wandering about, affiliating with one group or another, bigger groups through time. So that's kind of the general situation. In 1796, there were really very few whites and blacks living in modern-day Alabama. They primarily would have been clustered just north of Mobile Bay, up in the upper reaches of the Mobile-Tensaw Delta, where colonists from the French period onwards had settled and built plantations and brought in African slaves, some of whom became free people of color and stayed on in their own right, and also a lot of intermarriage with Indians. And so this was a very ethnically mixed region, and probably, I think, in 1796 would be by far the most populous area of colonization. If you can think of American history as not just the march forward of the kind of the federal government and white settlers bringing African slaves, it's much more complicated than that. There were lots of earlier colonial areas of occupation that were absorbed by the American expansion to the west. Well, one of the changes that occurred in 1799 was the establishment of Mississippi Territory, which I'll show you in a moment, and the kind of readjustment of that southern boundary with Spanish Florida. The Spanish and Americans had thought that the boundary was considerably north of where it turned out to be when they actually surveyed it on the ground. So in 1799, the Spanish abandoned a pretty major fort they had at St. Stephen's, and because it turned out to be an American territory. And when they moved their troops down to Mobile, the Americans moved in and built Fort Stoddard at Mount Vernon, which is just above the new boundary line. And as far as I know, this is the first newspaper that was ever published in what would become the state of Alabama. It was published at Fort Stoddard. The Mobile Sentinel, published in 1811. This was the major point of American control for this region of the Mississippi Territory. The federal judge was there, Harry Tolman, quite famous from that early period. The major federal military post was at Fort Stoddard, and so on. So this became really a major center for trade and other kinds of things. It also became a customs duty collection point for trade up the Alabama River into the American-held parts of Mississippi Territory. So this is what looks like just after 1799, a fairly subtle change. You have a boundary here with Georgia that becomes established, and the separate Mississippi Territory is then established. And you still see at this point that this region on the coast is still in Spanish control, part of Florida. It's not tremendously different. Well, this is a revision then in 1812 of that 1796 map, the postal map again. And for our purposes, the main addition to it is the creation of the federal road, which ran right through here. So I'll show you a close-up of that. This is a really extraordinary map, incredibly rare. It came up for sale a few months ago on a place out in San Diego, so I stole the image off the internet, like most people do, and here you have it. So it was either that or spend $100,000, which I didn't have. So, but anyway, this is the federal road as it's shown on that map, just the Alabama section. There is a big chunk of the federal road in Georgia, but who cares about that, right? We're in Alabama, and that's my focus for the grant, so we were kind of ignoring that part of it. Somebody else can tackle that. But anyway, this is the route, and there are alternative routes shown, at least in this section. This is a major problem we're trying to deal with. But anyway, this is what I'll be kind of commenting on throughout here. The reason this road was built was primarily because in 1803, when Thomas Jefferson pushed through the Louisiana Purchase, America acquired New Orleans, a major population center and a major port on the Gulf, and of great strategic importance to the United States. And immediately the government realized they needed to be able to resupply and just maintain communications with New Orleans and the rest of the country. And so their planning began and negotiations began for creation of a land route rather than depending on just sea travel. And it really wasn't until 1805 when the real opportunity arose, when the U.S. government began renegotiating treaties with all the southeastern tribes. And there was treaty negotiations with the Choctaws and Chickasaws and the Creeks. And one major part of the Creek Treaty allowed the American government to have a route that they would use primarily for postal service and for movement of troops if needed through the Creek Nation. So kind of to reorient here with the areas of settlement, this is still the boundary here between Spanish Florida and the American Mississippi Territory. Here's that settlement of old colonists, a lot of old Tories, people who had fought against the Patriots, the Whigs in the American Revolution, and had fled after their property was confiscated in Georgia and South Carolina, North Carolina. So these are pretty virulently anti-American colonists down here, these folks, intermarried with Indians in many cases, and also holding many black slaves. So big populations kind of scattered through this area. There was a boundary, though, between the Indian nations and the American settlement, which is not shown in very many maps. It's kind of was a fiction that America actually controlled this huge area they called Mississippi Territory. The boundary actually ran kind of through the middle of Clarke County here, and this would be Choctaw land on one side. Eventually the American settlements pick up over here, and the boundary continues down and then crosses at just above Fort Mims. And so this is all Creek country. This whole region here was part of the Creek Nation. And so the road mainly ran through Indian lands. It was not an area where Americans could expect to settle anytime soon. And they were expected actually to move along pretty rapidly along that route. The people who controlled American access on the federal road were primarily the military down here at Fort Stuyvesant, which is right here. And well off the map in Georgia was the Indian agent for the Creek Nation, Benjamin Hawkins, and he issued passports, many of which still survive today, and they're really interesting documents. They would allow named individuals with their families or business partners to come into the Creek Nation for some purpose, but not to linger and certainly not to settle. So it was just a kind of a passport for transit along the federal road. Okay, so where are we now? We're up to 1814. This is actually after the war, but it does show some changes that occurred just prior to the Creek War in 1813. Actually, in 1810, the Americans who were living in this region, which had become, by this point, by 1810, this was the major area of American settlement. Not the old Tories over here, but these are new settlers coming into the Natchez region. And there were many thousands of people who came down the Federal Road prior to the Creek War and were heading primarily to Natchez. This is kind of an unexpected development, I think, on the part of the American government. They built the road for other purposes, but it was used to eventually to funnel settlers into the Natchez area. So this is a very large population by 1810, and they become increasingly disgruntled with the fact that they can't get past the Spanish control of the coast down here to trade their goods out into the Gulf and beyond. So a group of them in 1810, basically they're filibusters. They just march into this region of what are called the Florida parishes of Louisiana. They're called it because it was part of West Florida originally, and they seize those 6 parishes in that area, and basically just take them away from the Spanish. And the Spanish don't contest it. There was apparently some kind of diplomatic funny business going on between the French and the Americans and the Spanish. In 1803, when the French sold the Louisiana Purchase to the Americans, the American impression apparently was, according to Madison and other people involved, was that this coastal area would be included. And so even though it was Spanish territory, as Louisiana was actually held by the Spanish, the French were selling it out from under them. And the Spanish didn't agree with that part of it. So they contested this region. And so it was kind of a piecemeal acquisition through time by the Americans of this area. early in 1813, then before the Creek War broke out, but during the War of 1812, so Americans already fighting the British at this time, the American Army under General Wilkinson marches in and seizes Mobile, and at that point then everything from the Pearl River to the Perdido River over here becomes American territory, again just by seizure. They didn't worry about treaties or anything at that point, and because of the fact that it was a war going on, it was never actually reversed, although the treaty again at the end of the War of 1812 probably should have reversed that part of it. So all very complicated, but eventually what we have now is free American access both down the Mississippi River and down the Alabama system into the Gulf of Mexico from 1813 onwards. So that's kind of the situation from the American perspective. The only other big settlement, and it was actually not very big at all, was Huntsville had been founded up here earlier in that decade, and so very isolated settlement, much more closely associated with Tennessee than the Natchez area or the Mobile area was. And there were a few other Americans, traders, mainly living with the Indians in here, but population is very small. We're talking about a few thousand American citizens in this area. All right, so that's kind of the general situation. We have here to kind of summarize the federal road, just roughly where it went. It crossed the river at Fort Mims. Samuel Mims actually probably became wealthy mainly because of the federal road. He had been a settler in that region since 1797, but really became very wealthy because he was one of the first to set up a ferry, and he charged, I think, $1 per wagon or some such amount, which is pretty steep back then. And because of the federal traffic of troops in particular, plus all the settlers going to Natchez, he became very economically well off. And so he had a big plantation in that area. And right before the Creek War broke out, because he had one of the largest houses, and I guess he just simply offered, we don't know exactly what happened, but he seems to have offered his neighbors, which included both American settlers and their slaves, and his neighbors, the Creek Indians in that region, to come there to take protection until the Indian scare blew over, which of course it didn't, but that was what his story was about. There were lots of other trails in this area. We don't know very much about them, unfortunately, but a couple of them are very important. One is the Wolf Trail, which is only mentioned a few times in documents, shown on relatively few maps. But down here, at least, it follows Highway 29 pretty closely. It runs down the Escambia River and was a major part of the trade system that the Creek Indians used to reach Pensacola, which Pensacola and Mobile during earlier colonial times were the major locations where Indians could trade with Europeans. If they wanted to go direct to the source, there were stores in both towns that the Indians could visit and purchase all kinds of goods. They'd usually exchange things like deer skins and furs and other forest products for all kinds of manufactured goods made mostly in England. Even though this was Spanish territory, it's mostly English merchants down in this region. So that trail got a lot of traffic, probably more actually than this one did in this section. These roads, the federal road is simply following, most of its length is simply following an earlier Indian trail. And they're very typically found on the ridges between drainages. You can see that this road generally falls between drainages that run to the east and west. So it's on the high ridge overlooking both drainages. And they only would cross the river when they absolutely needed to, because it's always a dangerous thing to do without a bridge or a ferry. So that's why these trails are located where they are. There's another one that's even less well known, the Tuckabachie Path, which leads to the Indian town of Tuckabachie up here, which is near modern-day Tallahassee. And it was also a pretty important trade route at different periods. And there were many more. We just don't know about too many in any detail enough to map them. All right, so we come up to 1813, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Indian perspective here. Even though I don't have very many images, we'll just linger on Josiah Francis here, the Alabama prophet. But he's a good representative of the people among the Creeks who were very disgruntled with the Americans and the American treatment of the Creek Indians and Southeastern Indians in general. There were a group of Southeastern Indians, such as the Indians around the Tensaw, the Creeks who had moved down near Mobile. These were people who were mostly the offspring of white traders and Indian women. And because of the nature of Indian society, which is matrilineal, because their mothers were Indians, they were considered parts of the Creek Nation as well. So these traders had kind of dual nationalities. They were either Americans or British or Spanish nationals, but then also members of the Creek Nation. And so that was one group that had some economic advantages. When their children grew up, they inherited often wealth from their father as well as their mother, which was a great advantage among the Creeks. And also because they were living down there, speaking probably many different European languages as well as Indian languages, they had all kinds of advantages in trading and dealing and negotiating diplomatically with the Europeans and with the Americans. So they became very wealthy as well. They also tended to buy slaves, have big plantations, and kind of emulate European and American sorts of plantation economies. Well, most of the rest of the Indians in the interior of the Southeast didn't have those options or didn't want to pursue that kind of assimilation route. And they were quite content actually to be Indians and thought their lifestyle was quite nice. They didn't have any real impetus to try to change their way of life. Even though the Americans throughout this period from 1798 or 99 onwards tried strenuously to encourage this assimilation process. The Americans actually institutionalized it in a policy they called the policy of civilization or plan of civilization. And the name itself indicates it's kind of a loaded term. You know, the Indians thought they were already pretty civilized, and the Americans didn't, essentially was what it broke down to. The main motivation really for the Americans, this includes President Washington and Henry Knox is Secretary of the Army. They were both kind of together apparently melded this policy out. But it was accepted in by all successive presidents. Jefferson was a big fan of the plan of civilization. And the idea was twofold. I think they were really, deep down, I think they had good intentions with this. They saw that previous centuries of American expansion along the coast of the Atlantic coast area had really devastated the Indians in that region. The Indians had been pushed out of almost all their land. The ones that were left largely were living in extreme poverty, had no real means of supporting themselves except hunting occasionally, and just were not doing very well at all. Their numbers had dwindled dramatically. And so Jefferson in particular was very aware of that because of his historical research that he had done in Virginia. And so generally the American government's idea was that there might be a different way to go about this. None of them had any doubt that they should take all the land that the Indians could possibly give up. It was very much a land grab from the very beginning. But the benevolent part of it, and benevolence was a key term in their political philosophy back then. They thought that they should treat people well while getting what they wanted. And the way they thought they could accomplish this was to, if you could assimilate the Indians, make them part of American society, and basically make them disappear as Indians, the problem is gone. You have, instead of people running around over vast tracts of land hunting, if you could convert them to a farming way of life, they would use much less land per person, and that would free up lots of land for American settlers. So on paper, it sounded like a great idea. The big obstacle was that most Indians didn't want to participate in that plan, no matter what the incentives given by the American government officials, like Benjamin Hawkins. And so he had relatively few takers on his plan of civilization. Most of the people that did participate in it were the ones down in the Tensas, Mobile Delta region, and some on the Georgia side of the line. There was some over there as well. So you end up with this big schism. One thing I should mention real quickly, if I have time here, is that there's a gender issue as well, which is kind of interesting. By asking the Indians to give up most of their hunting and devote all their energies to farming in a kind of a European style of farming involving plows, and in many cases they were thinking in terms of slave labor to run big plantations. What they were really asking the Indians to do, the Indian men in particular, was to stop being Indian men and become Indian women. Because prior to this time, Indian women had been the farmers. And this is a long tradition going back probably several thousand years, actually. We know from 1000 AD onwards, the women were full-time, very proficient farmers. And with some help from the men to clear fields, it was mostly a women's activity. And the men that did other things to contribute, but they didn't participate in farming very much. the plan of civilization also called for changes in women's behaviors too. And since they were farming, Americans were asking them to do was stop farming and become people who spun and wove cloth and did things that like American women settlers were doing. And so this assimilation idea wasn't at all simple for the Indians to accept. And most of them thought that not only was it a bad idea, it emasculated the men, it did all kinds of other things that were just really distasteful to many of them. And it also involved changes in religion and other things that we don't know very much about, but they were certainly part of it as well. So there were a big faction of Indians then, such as one of their leaders here, Josiah Francis, who Francis himself was part French. He was mixed ethnicity, as were many of the other anti-American faction at that period. And I guess what really coalesced them into a unified group that could actually resist American assimilation was a shift in religious beliefs. Early in the 1800s, about 1808 or 1808 or 9, there was a new religious development in the eastern tribes, mainly focusing on the Shawnees. It's often called well, Tecumseh is the most famous individual involved, but his brother, Tenskwatawa, was known as the Shawnee prophet, and he was the one that had some visions at this period of how to deal with the Americans, essentially, in a way that was appropriate to his religious beliefs. And what they were doing was kind of reaching way back into their earlier period when they were trying to remember how things had functioned before the appearance of whites, basically. And they didn't have any written records to do that, but they did have lots of traditions about how things had gone on before. So they kind of reconstructed, and I'm sure it wasn't this kind of objective sort of thing. I think it was a very emotional, religious experience that they felt. But what they came up with was a way to justify doing away with most of what they had accepted from the Europeans, from the traders that they'd known for centuries, and from these new American settlers moving down the Federal Road. They wouldn't accept the plow. They would try to get rid of all the domesticated animals that had kind of moved into the Creek Nation and other parts of the Southeast. They do away with as much European kind of technology, all the metals and things that they were having to buy rather than make themselves, and try to go back to a more self-sufficient sort of economy that fitted better with their image of what Indians should be doing in this world. So that's kind of in a nutshell, I think, what Josiah Francis was preaching. He actually went to visit the Shawnee prophet along with many other Creeks, and they sat at the prophet's feet and they learned this new religious teachings, and then came back and spread the religion among the Creeks. This new faction called themselves the Red Sticks because they were very militaristic, and the Red Stick was was a war club, basically, type of weapon that they adopted as their own. It wasn't a gun and it wasn't a knife. It was what they thought was a more traditional kind of Indian weapon. And so by 1813, this very militaristic faction was right on the verge of a civil war. Actually, it did break out during the summer of 1813 with the Creeks who weren't so sure that this was the right way to go. There were a lot of people who thought they should try to accommodate the American push toward civilization, and were doing their best to get along with the Americans, and the Red Sticks then opposing them very, very violently. We just learned fairly recently here, well, one thing, I should back up a second. This kind of reaction to the European presence is called a revitalization movement by anthropologists. It's been recognized for about 50 years now as a kind of a fairly normal, very common response to change that's just out of control. It's out of your own control, and in fact, I kind of think we're going through a revitalization in the United States at this moment, but it's a kind of thing that has been seen in many parts of the world as European colonization really became very oppressive to many native peoples throughout the world. And so it's not at all a unique kind of situation. What we're just learning now, though, is that this response also dates way back into the prehistoric period. We think it goes well back into earlier times, and it's probably not the first time that the Creek people had a revitalization. One of the first things they did when they decided to finally go to war with their own people who weren't willing to accept this revitalization idea was to kill the chiefs. That was their main target initially. And the reason they did that was that the chiefs were the ones who had negotiated treaties like the 1805 treaty that allowed the Federal Road to be built at all. and later kinds of negotiations that the Creeks thought were really just setting them up for losing their lands and changing their way of life. And so the chiefs became the target. They'd been co-opted by the Americans, and most of them weren't willing to go along with the Red State movement. Some did, but most weren't. And so they were the target initially. And it led to several pitched battles, but it also led to kind of a breaking apart of the Creek people. Many of those who followed the Red Stick leaders stayed in the area of what's Alabama today, and many others who were opposed to them fled into Georgia. And so there's this big shift right at the kind of late summer of 1813. Let's see what else we got. Oh, here. One thing that of course contributed to all this was the arrival in 1812 of Tecumseh, who's the brother of the Shawnee Prophet. He came south to try to find allies and converts. He was there's kind of been a portrayal of Tecumseh as primarily a war leader, with his brother being mainly the religious leader. But historians have been rethinking that, and it looks like Tecumseh was as much a religious leader as his brother. And certainly that was his role in the South, was not only to negotiate military alliances against the Americans, but also to try to promote the new religion. And certainly the one natural event that really played into the hands of the Shawnees and the Red Sticks was this big, impressive earthquake of 1811-12, this whole series of massive earthquakes, which are the biggest known in historic times in the eastern United States. If they happened today at that scale, we'd have just incredible devastation of a lot of cities in the east today. But it was pretty sparsely settled, except by Indians, and so we don't have too many accounts of damage or loss of life. But it was a very impressive thing, apparently, to live through. And after kind of following in the footsteps of Tecumseh's teachings to the Creek people, it did produce a lot of converts. Also produced a lot of converts among the Baptists and Methodists and Presbyterians living in the Natchez and Mobile regions. There were huge increases in church rolls right after the New Madrid earthquakes. So it affected lots of people in kind of similar ways, actually, in terms of religious conversion. All right, so here's the situation then, right at the point of conflict. The Creeks have been battling each other for several months up in the nation, and we have then increasing concerns among the American settlers in the Natchez area, as well as in the Mobile, in the Mobile-Tensaw region. And people begin to ford up, and that's when Fort Mims is built, these real flimsy stockade. It's been excavated over a period of many years now, from the 1960s onwards. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I was able to go out and excavate a little bit of the stockade itself, which hadn't actually been identified as such before that point. And the trench for the stockade was only about, if you count the plow zone, maybe 6 inches deep. And maybe there's been some ground compaction, but certainly the posts were set no deeper than a foot. And it's amazing, when the Creeks attacked, they didn't just push the stockade over, because it was very, very flimsy, which is true of most of these forts, I think. But anyway, there are about 20 of them. There are quite a lot. And here you can see this is the Creek Nation boundary. They kind of line up right along the boundary, because these people, these settlers who were really beginning finally in 1810, 1811, 12 to flow into this region, were trying to push up against the boundary, trying to take all the best land they could right up against the edge of the Creek territory, with the idea that someday, as it had happened many times in the past, they knew that eventually they would get to jump over that boundary and claim land on the other side. So they're putting a lot of pressure on the Creeks, and the Creeks, of course, understood that quite well from their perspective as well. So that's kind of the situation right at the point of before the Creek War starts. And can't give it away because it's not part of my topic today, but of course the battle at Fort Mims actually follows on a little skirmish on Burnt Corn Creek, but the battle at Fort Mims is really what brings America into the war against the Red Stick Creeks. And here's a little map of Fort Mims. It's in the collections here, really very nice map drawn just after the battle. So the fort was destroyed, but archaeology has shown that the map is pretty accurate. And you can see there were something like 450 people crammed inside this little bit over a 1 acre size fort, very, very crowded. Sorry, I keep doing that. Here's the Federal Road, by the way, leading to Mims Ferry over here, Holly Creek Landing. So just, I don't know, shouldn't get into all this. This is various battles that happened at during the Creek War. But back to the Federal Road for one last bit here. One of the things that actually triggered this conflict between the Red Sticks and the rest of the Creek Nation and began to involve the Americans was an incident that happened in 1812 along the Federal Road at a place called Maddox Tavern or Maddox Store, which is very close to modern-day Pentalala. A little community of Pentalala is kind of in here, I think, somewhere, and Maddox Store over here. This is in southern Montgomery County, right near the Lowndes County border. And here it is, the blow-up. These are a series of really nice maps drawn by the first Surveyor General in Alabama, Thomas Freeman, back in 1817-18, just after the huge land cession at the end of the Creek War that ceded most of Alabama to the American government finally. And so it's a very early map. It's quite accurate. We were able to take these kind of maps and overlay them onto aerial photos today. And for example, this part of this little county road here, actually right down here, there's a street sign that says Federal Road. So in some cases, we get some historical benefit from the fact that some modern roads actually sit right on top of the old road, but it does diverge, in both directions actually here. But anyway, what we were looking for was trying to find some archaeological evidence of these places that we've been reading about in Alabama history for many years, and Maddox Store is one of those. What happened there was a fellow traveling the Federal Road, a guy named Meredith, who was traveling with his family down the road heading toward the Mobile region. And for some reason, we don't know really what happened, but Meredith was murdered by Creeks right near the store. And when he was found, actually, he's still alive and was taken to the store, and he died there. And Manak, the guy that's the store is named for, is part Dutch, part Creek, son of an earlier trader and translator living among the Creeks. And he became very wealthy, like many of his people in similar situations, by running the store along the Federal Road. It was one of the few places travelers could stay for the night, get food and drink and whatever else went on at the tavern. And so he was kind of caught up in this. When the murder occurred, a lot of people blamed him actually among the American government because he was an easy target. He was the one that should have been responsible for the safety of people in that vicinity. But what eventually happened was that the chiefs of the headmen of the Creek Nation ordered the execution of the people who had killed Meredith, and that kind of judicial exercise was not normal for the Creek Nation at that point. They were very much ruled by relatives should avenge the death of any of their relatives by killing either that individual, the murderer, or the relative of the murderer. And they had bypassed all that old legal precedent among the Creeks and decided they would simply send people out from the nation itself and kill these murderers. And that further inflamed the Red Sticks because it was not a traditional way to do things. And Red Sticks were trying to be as traditional as possible at that point. So anyway, important spot. We wanted to find it. So we zoom in on here and we see that, in fact, the little circle that indicates where the store was back in 1818 or so. It's sitting around top of where a modern house sits. So Craig Sheldon here and others in this region got in touch with the landowners, the Morrell brothers, and they were very interested. They were quite well aware of this location being the spot where Maddox Store was thought to be. And so we organized a little expedition to go do some archaeological testing in that spot to see if we could in fact confirm that was the location. So we rounded up students and volunteers from all over the state, got together for a day, and did our standard metal detecting and shovel testing kind of survey methods. It's a very low impact kind of way to find out whether there's an archaeological site in a spot. And what we found was, did it again. Here's the current houses. And these clusters show where we were looking for artifacts, and the dark spots show where artifacts were found. And the kinds of artifacts are shown up here on the top. These are pieces of Creek Indian pottery and pieces of British pottery from the same period, just right around 1813, 1814. And given what we know about where the Creeks were living, this is the only Creek site, Bannock being part Creek, the only Creek site that should have been in this spot. So we're confident that we in fact have Maddox Tavern. And we've been trying to do that all along the Federal Road, and we'll continue to do that throughout the next few months, looking for various historic sites that really haven't been pursued in recent years, and hopefully be able to make some progress, learning more about that part of Alabama's history. Federal Road's got it's 250 miles long approximately in Alabama. It's a lot of territory to cover, but great history all along it. Just yesterday I was taken out to a place in northern Baldwin County near the Little River that is the house of William Weatherford. I had no idea his house was still standing, but the leader of the attack, one of the leaders of the attack on Fort Mims, somehow rehabilitated himself after the Creek War and was actually living amongst the people he had been fighting a few years earlier in the Little River area. And he had a nice, impressive house that he built, dog trot style house, and it's still there. So there's all kinds of great things to be found still in Alabama that really haven't been, I don't think, appreciated fully by everybody. This is a little section of road that was studied by a guy named Fletcher Hale back in 1947. He was a county engineer in Monroe County back during World War II. Became very interested in the federal road, and this is before much paving had gone on. So he was actually able to go and look around sections of the road that were pretty intact. And in this case, up kind of east of here, he found Fort Hull, one of the Creek War forts. It's an earthwork still standing. There, right nearby, an old, what he called an old log house. It's this little sketch of it up here, kind of a saddlebag, dog trot style log house. These are standard, that's the standard appearance of a tavern at that period. We think that was kind of the norm. And I don't believe that house still exists, but we do have a little sketch of it at least. So plenty of interesting things to still study. Here are little bits and pieces of the federal road. Some of you might have visited the Natchez Trace over in Mississippi primarily. And you know, the most famous parts of it are big entrenched sections where people traveled, thousands of people traveled on the road, and they actually wore down through the dirt. We're finding bits and pieces of the road like that in Alabama on the federal road as well, which really is exciting to me. This is a nice section to still use as a drive, and it's hard to see here, but this is a big entrenched section in Monroe County. We've seen them as well in Butler County, and probably we'll find them to the east of here, I think, more likely than anywhere else. There are still a few taverns around. This Watkins Inn here is still standing. It's a hunting lodge now, or hunting camp, but in great shape, and it's a very early tavern. Not sure about the one up here in Butler County. It may still be around. And here's more bits and pieces of intact portions of the federal road. Catherine Bronze is in the audience here someplace, somewhere. There she is. She and I have just gotten a little grant to do a guidebook to the federal road, so hopefully in a couple of years we will be able to share what we're learning about this neat road, and you can all go, well, you can go travel it now actually. There are flyers available, but we're going to hopefully add to the awareness of the federal road and all the things to see along it. Another few sections. This is right near Mannix store on the Montgomery-Lowndes County line. And over in Butler County, ran into all kinds of folks, and Monroe County as well here, who have been very helpful. It's amazing, everybody, there are hundreds of people out there who know a lot of this information, and they're very anxious to tell others about it. It's an exciting kind of topic for many people here, and we're having a tremendous time meeting these folks and talking with them and learning what we can about it. So that concludes my talk. Thank you. Okay, so the question is about Major Daniel Beasley, the commander at Fort Mims, and whether I think he was responsible for the disaster. I don't think there's any doubt that he was a very inept officer. He was not he was a militia officer. He had no military background. He's most famous, of course, for having left the gate open, allowing the Creeks to rush right into the fort, which is a pretty basic blunder. So I don't think anybody would excuse him for that. And apparently the gate couldn't be closed. You know, there was such lax discipline at the fort that sand or dirt or something had piled up against the gate. It's a very famous story from Albert Pickett's history, you know, that talks about Beasley's responsibility. A lot of people, I think, afterwards, though, in the press, there was a big debate about who was responsible, and Beasley was a good target because he was dead and couldn't fight back. But people were also going after General Claiborne, who was the overall commander of the Mississippi Territorial Militia, and he did take a lot of heat for it, and actually it pretty much killed him, I think. He was very hurt by all the attacks, the political and public attacks against him, who were really blaming him rather than Beasley. So the debate goes way back to the very beginnings, and I think there's plenty of blame to go around. It was the major disaster of American forces fighting Creek Indians up to that point, or any Indians up to that point. And from the other perspective, it was the greatest Indian victory of probably of the entire history of Indian wars to that point. It was a remarkable achievement that they could take a fortified settlement like that. There were 100 militia inside. There were about 40 local militia, not territorial militia, and 100 or so other people who had weapons who were fighting off the Red Stick attacks. So it was not simply a walk-in and massacre the inhabitants. It was a long, drawn-out battle, and long after Beasley died, they were still fighting. So it's more of a complicated story than simply blaming Beasley for that. What was the role of the British supplies to the Red Sticks in the beginning of in starting the war? Is that your question? Okay. Yeah. Well, there was a lot of espionage going on. There were at least 5 American spies in Pensacola when the Red Stick Party came down to get supplies prior to the battle at Burncorn Creek. The place was overrun with spies, probably more spies than inhabitants in the town. There was it must have been quite something at the time. Well, there were no British directly involved. There was a British trader there who supplied the Creek Red Stick Party with goods. Most of the goods were British manufactured because they were coming out of the Patton and Leslie store there. One of the big supplies, though, besides the gunpowder and lead shot that was the main concern to the Americans, was Liverpool salt, or big bags of salt, all kinds of odd things that the Creeks were running out of, because they'd been pretty much embargoed. Once they began this Red Stick movement, Hawkins stopped traffic on the Federal Road, stopped traders from dealing with the Red Sticks, and so really the British in Pensacola were the only option that the Red Sticks had for any of this material that they, even though they were trying to wean themselves off anything having to do with European manufacture or technology, they still were very dependent on weaponry and on simply things like salt for processing food, for storage of food. Which was not at all a traditional Creek method of food preparation. So British were all tangled up in it, but at the time, I think also later on, Albert Pickett, the historian that first really dealt with this issue, tended to blame the whole thing on the British agitators trying to stir up the Creeks against the Americans. Creeks had plenty of reasons to dislike the Americans without need of the British. And in fact, the British were very little help to the Creeks until about a year later when they finally got involved in operations against New Orleans and against Mobile to the south there. Okay, the question is about 3-notch road and whether that corresponds to the federal road. I think in most cases it doesn't, although there are plenty of local names for different segments of the federal road. There's Stagecoach Road, Stage Road. There's a lot of different alternative names. It gets very, very confusing the further south we work along the federal road, because there's just a maze of roads that are very old. But 3-notch road simply refers to the kind of blazing that Americans often did along roadways, and so they may well have done that along the federal road too, but I think in general it refers to other roads. What we're trying to do is work from the earliest information we have and not from the latest, which is probably pretty different than how the road started out back in 1810. I forgot to mention it, but there's a pretty interesting survey done by Lieutenant Luckett out of Fort Stoddard in 1810. He was in charge of a party of axemen, soldiers with axes, who were supposed to widen the Indian path to something that a wagon could travel down. And he was not a very good surveyor, unfortunately. He got lost about 20 miles off the route before he realized he was not on it anymore. So it kind of gives you an idea of how ephemeral this road was. It's very hard to follow it. Also, he seemed to have gotten north and east mixed up routinely, so we're having a terrible time following his directions. He actually gave up at Pintalala Creek and went back home. So, Okay, the question is, do we know where the Battle of Burnt Corn Creek took place, and can we find it archaeologically, I guess you're asking. We'd really like to try to do that. The main clue, well, there's two of them, I guess. When people wrote about the battle right afterwards, just within a few days, they say they took the Federal Road north to Burnt Corn Springs, which is the modern-day little community of burnt corn, and then they followed the Wolf Trail down toward Pensacola. And so we kind of generally know, about where that was. And the battle took place at a crossing where the Wolf Trail crosses Burnt Corn Creek. Well, that narrows it down pretty good to a little section of north of Escambia County. And the local people there are pretty convinced that that's the location. In 1895, when Halbert and Ball, the really tremendous historians of the Creek War from that era, tried to locate it themselves, they came to that same conclusion, because there was, at that point in 1895, there was still a road crossing the creek at about the same spot, they thought. But nowadays we would expect to find archaeological evidence, and it might be very difficult to find because the battle was really primarily a skirmish, although it went on for a couple hours, but it covered who knows how much territory. It was a running battle for sure. There was no set positions where they fired each other. They were moving around. The Creeks initially retreated, left their pack horses to the Americans, and the Americans then started rummaging through the pack horses, got distracted with looting the stuff, and the Creeks came back and reattacked and chased them away, and then they kind of reestablished some position somewhere else. So we're not at all sure where any of that exactly happened, and we'd like to give it a shot, but I'm not tremendously optimistic we're going to find anything. The battle at the Little Bighorn is really the classic archaeological study of a running fight like that, and it took many, many years for the archaeology to finally be clear enough for historians to reinterpret the course of that battle. And now it's very well known, but that was a huge effort. And so if we figure out Burnt Corn Creek, we ought to be right up there in the annals of archaeological history, because that would be equally tough, I think, to do. Okay, the question was, what's the involvement of the North Carolina militia in the Creek War? And essentially, they came in fairly late, along with South Carolina militia, and they established some of those forts, Bainbridge and Decatur and Jackson, primarily, leading from the Georgia border to where Fort Toulouse stood. And they built Fort Jackson on top of Fort Toulouse. So mostly they were building forts and they were manning them. And I think they then, I'm sure Jim knows this better than I do, but I think they did send out certain detachments to round up other Red Stick groups who were still hiding out in the Cahaba Valley and other locations in the upper Alabama, and try to bring in Red Stick, basically the men and women, well, women and children primarily, who were just starving to death out in the woods at very late in the war, after the Battle of Horseshoe Bend and after the construction of Fort Jackson. And they eventually found several thousand Red Sticks and brought them to Fort Jackson and fed them for the summer. So that was, as far as I remember, that's their major involvement. Population of the Upper Creek Nation, part of the nation, that's a really good question. I would think 8,000 or so. That's just a guess. I haven't researched that recently, but it was maybe 8 to 10 because there were people coming from the Lower Creek Nation who were Red Stick sympathizers and joining them. So the population was very much in flux at that period. But I think just kind of thinking back on the numbers of rations given out at the various points along where the American Army was feeding refugees, I think that would be a fairly close guess. Probably they lost a couple thousand warriors in various, and other non-combatants as well during various battles. So they had lost quite a few of the population, maybe a quarter of the population by that point.
We are here because of our natural resources around us. The economic development that's happened because of those features. We have to make sure that those are here for generations to come, and it's not a choice. We don't have a choice of losing that. We have to do what's necessary to make sure that that's there forever. You know, in Mobile, Alabama, you don't have to go very far to enjoy the things we do, and then fishing, hunting, just being in the outdoors. And so we really appreciate the opportunities that Mobile and Baldwin County present to us. My name is Wayne Keith. I'm president of the board of Mobile BayKeeper. I'm in the air conditioning business here in Mobile. and we have a firm that's 54 years old. I'm actually a native Mobilian. My parents moved to Mobile in the late 40s. So there was a responsibility always there that we had to take care of the environment around us, and got more involved in the business community and the recreational community around Mobile. We started to understand we had to take care of both of those. And so, we now as a family, it's obviously with our involvement with BayKeeper and other organizations, they've become to appreciate, what we have to go through to make sure that we can keep the quality of life where we want it.
Unfortunately, our quality of life is in jeopardy. There is a threat looming in the Mobile-Tensas Delta that has already destroyed communities across the Southeast.
People in Roane County, Tennessee still aren't sure this evening just how bad a disaster they are facing after a coal ash spill that has covered neighborhoods and choked local rivers. Millions of tons of ash and sludge came pouring out when a dike at a coal plant gave way this week. But it's what's in that sludge and its potential long-term health effects that is causing the greatest worry tonight.
Every year, power plants generate 140 million tons of coal ash, enough to fill a train stretching from the North Pole to the South Pole. It contains chemicals like arsenic, mercury, and lead. It can cause cancer and developmental problems. It poisons fish and wildlife in rivers and lakes. In some places, the ash is dumped into uncovered pits. In others, it sits behind leaky dams.
Alabama Power is deciding to put profits before public health.
We believe that closing and capping these facilities in place on our plant sites is the safest, most effective, and most cost-effective option for us.
That process doesn't sit well with Mobile BayKeeper Director Casey Calloway.
We see the strong possibility that any of that coal ash could get into the groundwater, it could leak into our rivers. We don't know, and we know there's a lot that they will have to do to study to ensure that that won't happen. But it seems like a no-brainer, and they have a chance to go ahead and do the right thing and lead and let Alabama be a leader on this issue.
Across the state of Alabama, there are 9 coal-fired power plants. At each of these plants, there are giant unlined ponds of coal ash sludge that are held back by large dams right along the edge of our rivers. Plant Berry, located 25 miles straight up Mobile River from downtown Mobile, is where more than 16 million tons of coal ash sits in a 600-acre pond directly adjacent to the Mobile River and Mobile-Tensas Delta, one of the nation's most biologically diverse ecosystems. If the dam failed, tons of coal ash sludge containing heavy metals such as arsenic and mercury would go crashing into the rivers, impacting acres of land and miles of waterways. A potential disaster at Plant Berry would not only be devastating to our environment, but also to our economy and our way of life. We depend on clean water as a source of recreation for swimming, fishing, hunting, and boating. But we also depend on it for the health of many important industries like seafood, tourism, and shipping. That is why Alabama Power needs to do the right thing and move the coal ash to a lined landfill away from our rivers rather than leaving it to threaten the Delta and the Bay for years to come. We have already experienced one disaster. Our economy and environment cannot afford another one. Join us in taking action. Protect your home, coastal Alabama, from a coal ash catastrophe. We need you to tell Alabama Power to dig up the coal ash and move it to an appropriate, lined landfill away from the river. Visit our website at mobilebaykeeper.org, where you will find a pre-drafted letter to send to Alabama Power, or you can write your own. We need your voice because, as a community, we can win the battle against coal ash.